If you don't know who Hans Zimmer is in this day and age, you probably live in a cave. But if you are one of those Batman types, you should know that Zimmer is a German film composer and record producer who has been redefining film since the 80s. With his unique synthesizer expertise and bold experimentation of sound, Zimmer's musical work has constantly evolved to keep up with the ever-changing art of filmmaking. To think that his film career took off with films like Rain Man, Driving Miss Daisy, and Thelma and Louise, where the music could be considered more reflective of his work in 80s synth pop, compared to now, where we get loud, big-bodied works that characterize the big Hollywood styles of today. It is apparent Zimmer has come a long way from his pop jingle songs. In fact, his most recent creations completely juxtapose the more melodic music of the John Williams or Danny Elfman styles of writing. I consider Hans Zimmer to be a minimalist composer with a maximalist production sense. When we talk about minimal music, we are looking at a form of art music coined in the mid-20th century that utilizes limited musical materials. It is marked by a non-narrative and non-representational conception of work that focuses on the internal processes of music. One of the first pieces to be identified as minimalist is a work for solo piano that lasts around 6 hours. This work demonstrated many features that would come to be associated with minimalism, such as diatonic tonality or consonant harmony, phrase repetition, a steady pulse, gradual transformation through an additive process, duration, and the reiteration of smaller musical units such as motifs. Famous minimal music pioneers would include such composers as Steve Reich and Philip Glass, but also the Beach Boys, whose album Smiley Smile was called an experimental work of proto-minimal rock. Its innovations in the musical language of rock can be compared to those that introduced atonal and other non-traditional techniques into the classical tradition. Now wait, obviously film music has to represent something. You can't have non-representational music in film. That defeats the whole purpose, right? Wrong! If you think about it, the music that Hans Zimmer writes doesn't define itself or really tell any kind of story on its own. Let's listen to a few seconds of Medical Ship from one of Hans Zimmer's latest scores to Chris Nolan's Dunkirk. Doesn't really tell much of a story, does it? It just creates a feeling of tension through a soundscape. The pulsing violins shifting between just two different pitches and the chromatic low brass tones don't create any specific chord that the ear can recognize as either happy or sad particularly, but it is that uncertainty in the music that creates an uneasy feeling in the listener. Now let's pair the song with its corresponding scene.
You've missed it.
Just like how everyone on the beach of Dunkirk is unsure of whether or not they are going to live, or where the enemy is going to come back and attack them from as they stand there helplessly, Hans's score emulates those feelings. A pulse that gets faster and faster just as their beating hearts intensify, they sense their demise coming near. The layering of sound that gradually transforms the feeling of safety to that of approaching danger, and the motif of the violin shifting between two pitches, mimicking feelings of entrapment with a growing sense of urgency and nowhere to displace it as they wait for rescue. The entire score of Dunkirk encapsulates the feeling of uncertainty and fear by creating soundscapes rather than harmonies and melodies, and I think Dunkirk can be considered a masterwork of minimalist music and an important work of study when discussing 21st century musical movements. Obviously, not all of Hans Zimmer's pieces are as atonal as the score to Dunkirk. Let's turn to the iconic score from Inception, where Hans's maximalist production sense is most apparent. Repetition over time is a characteristic that is extremely important to defining music, as some minimalist composers strip down this idea to just being sound within a period of time. Repetition is readily apparent in the song Time from Inception, as it is very simple harmonically, repeating the same 2 sets of 4 chords. The first set is a set of 4, the second set a harmonic variation of the first. This chord progression is very pivotal and has been used historically as an easy way to create high drama and emotion, as it sounds beautiful and the chords flow well together. But how does Hans Zimmer utilize this chord progression as a quasi-minimalist? First off, the harmonic plan starts with a plagal sound going from 4 to 1, but ends up 7, which acts of 4 of 4. By establishing a plagal sound in the ear, the harmonic progression doesn't ever seem like it should end. And then more contextually, let's look at the title of the song itself, Time. Music adds duration to images we see on screen, commenting and defining how a film should be paced. Inception, a film all about time and is set in layers of dreams, with each layer having a different speed and perception of how time moves, Zimmer takes the opportunity to vary the duration of notes in the score depending on which layer of the dream they coincide with, the longest notes being in the deepest layers of the dream. Thus, this transformation of the notes within a repeating melodic structure characterizes the music as being a physical part of each dream layer. This sort of personification of the notes as being tools to define sound within time helps place the audience with the characters as they move through the levels of the dream. For another popular Hans Zimmer score, with time being essential to the film's narrative, Hans Zimmer writes Interstellar's harmony in Cornfield Chase, Day One, and Where We're Going, utilizing another simple chord progression. Theoretically, this should be more bland than Inception's score, but complexity can be found in his use of polyrhythms, which abnormalize this feeling of time. Just like how the characters in the movie are experiencing 2 different variations of physical time, the music is also realizing that experience of conflicting timelines all over the same pulse and theme. This characterization of music, appropriate considering the movie's subject matter, is what gives the film life and trajectory, and with the addition of pulsation and ticking clocks in the score, the temporal sense is realized, where time is considered the enemy. Both scores use simple, yet flowing chord progressions, droning, and steady pulses over moments of collapse to create a soundscape that musically defines otherwise undefinable worlds. People claim that film music is less academic because the trend in recent scores is to write simpler motifs and themes. But isn't that what film music is supposed to be? Music should be simple ideas that highlight the emotional peaks of the story while not overpowering it. Music is designed to meld with images being seen on screen in order to enhance the narrative. Hans Zimmer isn't necessarily a minimalist per se, nor is he the next Tchaikovsky. Hans Zimmer is so good at what he does because he knows exactly what types of sounds are going to encapsulate a theme. He writes the perfect notes that characterize abstract ideas, and his minimalist composition stylings, matched with his maximalist production value, allows him to create untamed music that defies our rules and expectations. And that's what makes Hans Zimmer a master of his craft.